Chapter 2 of Midnight for Charlie Bone, The U-Beam Ants. It was difficult to keep up with Uncle Peyton. He swept through wind and rain as if he wore hip boots. "I've never seen your uncle outside in the daytime," Benjamin panted. "He's a bit strange, isn't he?" "A bit," agreed Charlie, who was rather in awe of his peculiar uncle. He hurried as Uncle Peyton had already arrived at the steps of number 9. Benjamin fell behind. "Something's up with your family," he called to Charlie. "I hope you can still come to my birthday." "Nothing can stop me," said Charlie, reaching his uncle. "No dogs," said Uncle Peyton, as Benjamin and Runnerbean came leaping up to them. "Aw, please?" asked Benjamin. "Not today. This is family business," Uncle Peyton said sternly. "Go home." "Okay, bye then, Charlie." Benjamin trailed away, followed by Runnerbean, his ears down and tail between his legs. A real hangdog. Uncle Peyton ushered Charlie into the kitchen and then disappeared upstairs. Charlie found his mother and 2 grandmothers sitting at the kitchen table. Maisie looked very put out, but a secret smile played on Grandma Bone's thin lips. Charlie's mother was nervously stirring a cup of tea. Charlie couldn't imagine why. His mother didn't use sugar. "Sit down, Charlie," said Grandma Bone, as if she were about to put on a show entirely for his benefit. "Don't let the U-beams get at you," Maisie whispered. She took Charlie's hand and patted it. "What's going on?" asked Charlie. "The U-beam ants are coming," said his mother. "Why?" asked Charlie. The U-beam ants were Grandma Bone's 3 unmarried sisters. Charlie only saw them at Christmas, and he'd formed the impression that they were deeply disappointed in him. They always left a strange assortment of gifts: paint sets, musical instruments, masks and cloaks, and even a chemistry set. Charlie had found none of these things the least bit useful. He liked soccer and TV, and that was about it. Grandma Bone leaned across the table. Her eyes sparkled mysteriously. "My sisters are coming to assess you, Charlie. And if it is found that you are worthy, that you are, as I suspect, endowed, then they will provide the necessary funds to send you to Bloor's Academy." "Me? At Bloor's?" Charlie was aghast. "It's for geniuses." "Don't worry, love. You won't pass the test," said Maisie confidently. She got up muttering, "Of course. It's old Maisie who has to do all the preparation for our Lady Mucks, isn't it? I don't know why I bother." "There was to be a dinner for the ants," Charlie's mother explained. The best silver, the finest crystal, and the treasured china would be carried up from the cellar and laid in the chilly dining room, a room that was only ever used when the U-beam ants came. Maisie was defrosting chicken and fish and goodness knows what else, as fast as she could. Charlie would have been worried if he hadn't been completely convinced that he wouldn't pass the ants' test. He remembered how he'd tried to paint a picture for them and failed miserably. How he'd unsuccessfully attempted to play a violin, a flute, a harp, and a piano. He had put on the masks they provided: animals, clowns, pirates, cowboys, and spacemen, but only managed to act the part of Charlie Bone. Finally, it had to be admitted that he was not gifted. So as he waited for the great ants to arrive, Charlie was not as fearful as he should have been. Benjamin, on the other hand, was extremely fearful. Charlie was his best friend. His only friend. Anything that happened to Charlie would, indirectly, happen to him. Sinister events were closing in on his friend. Benjamin sat by his bedroom window and watched Charlie's house. As darkness fell, the streetlights came on, and the lights winked in the building behind the chestnut tree, in the basement, the attic, and all the bedrooms. What was going on? The wind intensified. Thunder and lightning coincided. That meant that the storm was right above. Benjamin clung to Runnerbean, and the big dog hid his face in Benjamin's sleeve. The street was now deserted except for 3 shadowy figures. On they came, a line of black umbrellas, hiding all but the hems of 3 dark coats and 6 boots, 4 black and 2 red. In spite of the wind, there was a strange rhythm in their movements, almost as if a dance were taking place beneath those wide umbrellas. The figures stopped beside the chestnut tree, as Benjamin feared they would, and then they climbed the steps to Charlie's house. For the first time in his life, Benjamin was glad to be himself and not Charlie Bone. At number 9, the table was set, and damp logs smoldered in the fireplace. When the doorbell rang, Charlie was sent to answer it. The three great aunts swept into the house, stamping their feet on the tiled floor and shaking out their wet umbrellas. Their coats were hurled across the hall, landing on Charlie as if he were a coat stand. "Pick them up, boy," commanded Aunt Lucretia as Charlie scrambled beneath the wet garments. "They're valuable moleskin, not rags." "Now, don't be harsh, Lucretia," said Aunt Eustacia. "Charlie's got a secret to tell us, haven't you, dear?" Mumbled Charlie. "Don't be shy," Aunt Venetia, the youngest, came swaying up to him. "We want to know everything." "You beams, come in, come in," Grandma Bone called from the dining room. The three sisters sailed through the door. Lucretia, the eldest, first. Venetia, the youngest, last. Snatching glasses of sherry from Grandma Bone, they gathered around the dwindling fire, shaking their damp skirts and patting their abundant hair. Lucretia's white as snow, Eustatia's iron gray, Venetia's still black and folded around her head like raven's wings. Charlie backed away and made for the kitchen, where Maisie and his mother were busy around the stove. "Take the soup in, will you, Charlie?" asked his mother. Charlie didn't want to be alone with the great aunts, but his mother looked hot and weary, so he did as she asked. The soup tureen was very heavy. Charlie could feel the glint of U-beam eyes following him around the long dining room table. He put the tureen on a mat and ran to get the bowls before Grandma Bone could complain about the drop of soup that he had spilled over. When everything was ready, Grandma Bone rang a bell, which Charlie thought was rather silly. Everyone could see that the meal was on the table. "Why do we need a bell?" he asked. "Tradition," snapped Grandma Bone, "and Peyton has no sense of smell." "But Uncle Peyton never eats with us." "Today," said Grandma Bone empathetically, "he will." "And there's an end to it," said Maisie with a grin, which soon faded when the four sisters glared at her. Uncle Peyton arrived looking irritated, and the meal began. Maisie had done her best, but 10 minutes was rather short notice to create a meal of any distinction. The soup was salty, the chicken dry, and the pudding had a sad, drowned look. No one complained, however. They ate fast and heartily. Maisie and Charlie's mother cleared the table. Peyton and Charlie helped, and then it was time for the assessment. Charlie discovered that his mother was not allowed to be present. "I won't go in there without you," he said. "I won't." "Charlie, you must," said his mother. "The U-beams have a lot of money. I have nothing." "It beats me why you want Charlie to go to that ridiculous academy," said Maisie. "For his father's sake," said Charlie's mother. Maisie clicked her tongue and said nothing more. Charlie's father was dead, so why did it matter so much? His mother wouldn't tell him. She gave him a little push toward the dining room, and in he went. "I want my mom in here, or I won't do it," said Charlie. My, a boy who wants his mother," Aunt Venetia cooed. "A boy who wants his mother is a baby," said Aunt Lucretia sternly. "Time to grow up, Charlie. This is a U-beam affair. We don't want distractions." At this point, Uncle Peyton tried to slip away, but his oldest sister called him back. "Peyton, you're needed. Do your duty for once." Uncle Peyton reluctantly slid into the chair she indicated. Charlie was made to sit on one side of the table, facing the four sisters. Uncle Peyton sat at the end. Charlie wondered how the assessment would be conducted. There appeared to be no musical instruments, no masks or paintbrushes on the table. He waited. They watched him. "Where did he get that hair?" Aunt Lucretia asked. "His mother sighed," said Grandma Bone. "A Welshman." She spoke as if Charlie were not there. "Ah," the three great aunts sighed disapprovingly. Aunt Lucretia was fumbling in a large leather bag. At last she drew out a brown paper package tied with black ribbon. She tugged the ribbon, and the package fell open, revealing a pile of ancient-looking photographs. Grandma Bone pushed the package over to Charlie, and the contents fanned out across the table. "What am I supposed to do with these?" asked Charlie, who had a very good idea what they wanted him to do. The great aunts smiled encouragingly. Charlie prayed that nothing would happen, that he could just glance at the dusty-looking collection and look away before he heard voices. But one quick look told him that the people in the photographs were making a great deal of noise. They were playing instruments, cellos, pianos, violins. They were dancing, singing, laughing. Charlie pretended not to hear. He tried to push them away from him, toward Aunt Lucretia. She pushed them back. "What do you hear, Charlie?" asked Grandma Bone. "Nothing," said Charlie. "Come on, Charlie, try," said Aunt Venetia. "And don't lie," said Aunt Eustacia. "Or we'll make you cry," snarled Aunt Lucretia. That made Charlie angry. He wasn't going to cry for anyone. "I don't hear nothing," he said, shoving the photographs away. "Anything," said Aunt Lucretia, shoving them back. "You don't hear anything. Not nothing. Grammar, boy. Has no one taught you?" "He clearly needs to attend the academy," said Aunt Eustacia. "Just look at them, Charlie dear," said Aunt Venetia sweetly. "Just for 1 minute, and if nothing happens, we'll leave you in peace and just," she waved her long white fingers, "melt away." "All right," Charlie said grudgingly. He thought he could get away with it. Just look at the photographs and block out the sounds. But it didn't work. The sounds of cellos, pianos, sopranos, and great gusts of laughter came bursting out at him, filling the room. The great aunts were talking to him. He could see their thin lips working away, but he couldn't hear their words above the dreadful clamor of the photographs. At last, Charlie seized the pile and flung them face down onto the table. The sudden silence was a wonderful relief. The great aunts stared at him, quietly triumphant. It was Aunt Venetia who spoke first. "There, that wasn't so bad, was it, Charlie?" Charlie realized he'd been tricked. He'd have to watch out for Aunt Venetia in the future. She was obviously more cunning than her sisters. "Who are all those people anyway?" he asked miserably. "Your ancestors, Charlie," said Aunt Lucretia. "Ubeam blood ran in all their veins, as it does in yours, dear clever boy." Her attitude had changed completely, but Aunt Lucretia, being nice, was just as scary as Aunt Lucretia being nasty. "You can go now, Charlie," said Grandma Bone. "We have things to discuss, arrangements to make for your future." Charlie was only too glad to go. He leapt up and marched to the door. As he went, he caught sight of Uncle Peyton's face. He looked sad and far away, and Charlie wondered why he hadn't said a word the whole time he'd been there. Peyton gave Charlie a quick smile and then looked away. Charlie hurried to the kitchen where Maisie and his mother were eagerly waiting for the results of his assessment. "I think I've passed," he told them glumly. "Well, I'll be," said Maisie. "I thought you'd get away with it, Charlie." "Was it the voices?" Charlie nodded miserably. "Those crazy U-beams," Maisie shook her head. Charlie's mother, however, was not so unhappy. "The academy will be good for you," she said. "No, it won't," said Charlie. "I don't want to go. It's a boring old place for geniuses. I won't fit. It's halfway across the city, and I don't know anyone there. Suppose I refuse to go, Mom." "If you refuse, all this could disappear," said his mother, waving in the general direction of the kitchen cabinets. Charlie was astounded. Were his great aunts witches, then, making houses disappear at the touch of a wand, or maybe an umbrella? "Do you mean the house could disappear?" he asked. "Not exactly," said his mother, "but our lives would change. Maisie and I have nothing, not a bean. When your father Lyle died, we were at the mercy of the U-beams. They provided for everything. They bought the house, they paid the bills. I'm sorry, Charlie. You'll have to go to Bloor's if that's what they want." Charlie felt very tired. "Okay," he said, "and now I'm going to bed." He had forgotten about the orange envelope, but when he got to his bedroom, there it was on his pillow. His mother must have rescued it from the piles of food and dishes on the kitchen table. Charlie decided not to take a second look at the man and his baby. He would take the photo straight back to Quick Photo tomorrow, and maybe get Runner Bean in exchange. When his mother came up to say goodnight, Charlie made her sit on his bed and answer a few questions. He felt he deserved to know more about himself before he set foot in Bloor's Academy. "First, I want to know what really happened to my father," Charlie said. "Tell me again." "I've told you so many times already, Charlie. It was foggy. He was tired. He drove off the road, and the car plunged into a quarry that was 100 meters deep. And why aren't there any photos of him around? Not one." A shadow passed across his mother's face. "There were," she said, "but one day when I was out, they all disappeared. Even the tiny picture in my locket." Charlie had never heard about this. "Why?" he asked. At last his mother told him the truth about the Ubeam family, how horrified they'd been when Lyle fell in love with her, Amy Jones, an ordinary girl with no exceptional talents. In a word, unendowed. The U-beams forbade the marriage. Their laws were ancient and strong. The women could marry whomever they choose, but the male with U-beam blood must marry an endowed girl. Lyle broke the rules. He and Amy Jones had eloped to Mexico. We had a wonderful honeymoon, sighed Charlie's mother. But when we came home, I knew that Lyle was worried. He hadn't escaped them after all. He was always looking over his shoulder, running from shadows. And then, one foggy night, when you were 2 years old, he got a phone call. A summons, really. Grandma Bone was ill. He had to go to her immediately. So he got into his car and drove into a quarry. She gazed into the distance for a moment and murmured, "He wasn't himself that day. Something had happened. It was almost as if he were under a spell." She wiped away a very small tear. "I don't think Grandma Bone has an ounce of love in her," she said. As far as the U-beams were concerned, when Lyle died, it was just an end of an unfortunate episode. But they were interested in you, Charlie. Suppose you turned out to be endowed. They realized they would have to take care of you until they found out. So they gave me a house and let Maisie move in, and then Grandma Bone arrived to watch us. Uncle Peyton came shortly after that because, well, I suppose he didn't have anywhere else to go. I was grateful for everything until the photos vanished. It was something I just couldn't understand. Grandma Bone denied having touched them, of course. Charlie listened to his mother's story and put two and two together. "I know why the photos vanished," he murmured. "Grandma Bone didn't want me to hear what my father had to say." "But Charlie, you were only 2, said his mother. "She didn't know that you would have this funny gift for hearing voices." "She guessed," said Charlie. "It's probably in the family." His serious face made his mother smile. She kissed him good night and told him not to worry about the U-beams. "And don't worry about Bloor's Academy either," she said. "After all, your father went there." "And did he have a talent?" asked Charlie. "Oh, yes," said his mother from the door, "but not your sort of talent, Charlie. He wasn't endowed. He was a musician." When she had gone, Charlie couldn't sleep. He had too much on his mind. It was unsettling to think he was part of such a peculiar family. He wanted to know more, much more. But where to begin? Perhaps Uncle Peyton could provide a few answers. He didn't seem as heartless as his sisters. The storm blew itself out. The rain stopped, the wind died, and the cathedral clock struck midnight. On the 12th stroke, Charlie felt a sudden, strange breathlessness. Something was happening to him. It was as if he were passing through a moment when he might live or die. He thought of Lyle, the father he couldn't remember. The moment passed, and Charlie found himself wide awake and restless. A few minutes later, he heard Uncle Peyton creak downstairs and go to the kitchen for a snack. Charlie had grown used to his uncle's nighttime ramble. It always woke him up. Usually, he would just turn over and go back to sleep. Tonight, he jumped out of bed and got dressed. When his uncle left the house, Charlie crept downstairs and followed him. He'd often wanted to do this, but he'd never had the courage. Tonight was different. He felt confident and determined. Peyton moved fast. By the time Charlie had closed the front door very softly behind him, his uncle was about to turn a corner. Keeping close to the houses, Charlie ran to the end of the street. Peyton paused and looked back. Charlie shrank into the shadows. The street they had turned onto was lit by small bell-shaped lamps that cast a soft glow on the wet cobblestones. Here, the trees grew closer. The walls were higher. It was a quiet and mysterious place. Peyton U-beam was on the move again, but now his purposeful stride had become an aimless stroll. Soon, Charlie, hopping from tree to tree, found himself only a few paces behind his uncle. A chill wind whistled near Charlie's ears, and he began to wonder if his midnight stalking was going to come to anything. Uncle Peyton hadn't turned into a vampire or a werewolf after all. Perhaps he just felt happier in the dark. Charlie was about to turn and creep back home when his uncle suddenly stopped. He was standing about a meter away from a lamppost, and a strange sort of humming came from him. Not humming exactly, because Charlie couldn't actually hear it. It was more like a feeling of humming, as though the air around his uncle were charged with soundless music. The light in the lamp grew brighter, so bright that Charlie could hardly look at it, and then, with a little crack, the glass shattered and shining fragments fell to the ground. Charlie gave a low gasp. He rubbed his eyes. Perhaps it was just coincidence. His uncle standing there while a power surge made the light in a lamp too hot for the glass. Peyton moved on, and Charlie followed, still hiding behind the trees. His uncle slowed down as he drew level with another lamppost. But this time, although the light became fierce and bright, Peyton walked past before the glass could shatter. And then, without looking back, he said, "Why are you following me?"